name is Isaac, and I'm a front-end developer with Identity Automation. So we have Greg and Jeff here with me, and I have some more friends, Fahad and Brian. So thanks, and thank you all for coming today. So today I want to cover D3 and how to use D3 with Ember. So 2 months ago, I got to use D3 to help visualize the steps for getting something approved and interact with these steps. I affectionately call my code roadmap, and let me show you what that looks like. So this is not the final product. So this is just a Mixin that I have. It's a graph that I created with D3, and you can interact with these. So you can click on this. I'll try to add an edge. You can also delete an edge, delete a vertex, and so on. And there are some other options that you can play around with. Yeah. So I had a great time for 3 reasons. One, the way we draw things in D3 reminded me of MATLAB, which is one of my favorite languages. 2, I got to apply graph theory, and if you can't tell by this shirt, I love math. And 3, I got to play with Post-it notes to try to come up with an algorithm for drawing graphs on desktop and mobile. I also had a difficult time trying to find out how to use D3 and Ember in the first place. Because Ember is a rather rare species, there's only one tutorial that I could find that helped me understand what I needed to do. But thanks to the tutorial, I was able to create a prototype roadmap over a weekend, use Ember's Mixin feature effectively, and I think most importantly, write extensive tests to show that roadmap really works. So in case you want to use Ember and D3 in your projects, I want to share some of the things that I learned with you today. We're going to create a game called Lights Out. It's a game from the 90s. Have any of you heard of this game by any chance? So it looks like this. It's an electronic handheld game. And let me show you the finished product. So this is what we're going to create by the end of today. So you see a grid of lights, a 5x5 grid of light of buttons, and you can press these buttons. And when you press it, that light, so if I press this light, for example, this light and its adjacent lights, the top, right, bottom, left, they're going to be toggled. So they're switched from on to off and off to on. So let's see if I can finish this one. So there you go. So that's how I finish that game. So to create a project in Ember, I can do Ember new, lights out. Let's see how long this takes. So now let's go into the directory, and I'm going to install 3 packages: D3, Ember D3, and Ember CLI SaaS. Okay. So the first 2, D3 and Ember D3, they're going to help us use D3 in Ember. And the last one, Ember CLI SaaS, lets us use SaaS for styling our app. You can also use Ember Browserify to import D3, but I recommend using Ember D3 because you can use name import, so you can only select the packages you need and whitelist the packages so that you can reduce the build size. So if you've never seen an Ember project before, this is the default layout for Ember 2 and higher, between Ember 2.1 and 2.18. So what I'm going to do first is, because I've installed SaaS, I'm going to change the name app.css to app.scss so that I can use SaaS there. Okay. And what I'm going to do is, in configuration, the environment.js, I can tell Ember to only import the packages that I need. For this tutorial, I just need 2 packages in D3, D3 scale and D3 selection. So the way I can specify that is, after app, I'm going to say Ember D3, and I'm going to provide an object only, and you give an array of the packages that you need. So for this, I need 2 packages, D3 scale and D3 selection. Simple, right? Unfortunately, Ember D3 doesn't know if you need additional packages to meet dependencies. So the only way you can figure those out is just do Ember server, check the console messages. If you have errors saying if you have missing dependencies, just include them again. So for this tutorial, I need 7 more packages. And these are D3 array, D3 collection.
And these are just the dependencies of the first 2?
Of the D3 scale, just, yeah. The error message will tell you this D3 scale needs D7. It's kind of annoying, but it's a one-time thing, so I figure, why not? Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is the SaaS. So that's this part. Okay. And here I'm just going to copy-paste the code for the styling. And it's going to make our app look nice. Afterwards, let's look at Ember. I'm going to create a component called lights out. And this lights out component is going to show the actual game, the board, and a message to the user.
Lights.
Oh, yes, thank you. Just delete it. And that reminds me, actually, I'm going to use pod option so that the template and the component are together. So this is going to be the default behavior in the future.
Okay,
I
so
don't know,
you're ready
yeah.
to destroy.
Great, thanks. And similarly, I can create a Mixin, and I'm going to call this responsive. And this Mixin is going to make sure that our D3 app is mobile responsive. So in general, a Mixin lets us practice inheritance or reuse code. For example, also I'll take my roadmap as an example. Roadmap is actually just a Mixin that draws a graph. It doesn't know what the graph is for. On the other hand, you may want to draw a graph for a very specific purpose. For example, you might be trying to create a board game that has some kind of board that utilizes some kind of graph. And in our application, we try to draw a graph so that the users can easily see the steps for getting something approved. So if you have such a specific purpose, you can extend my roadmap, which is a Mixin, and override some of the variables and methods to achieve that purpose. Now, in this tutorial, because I'm doing a live demo, I'm actually using the Mixin to hide some details and save time. So all the D3 and game-related code, they're going to be in the component, while the non-D3, the boring detail, they're going to be hidden in the Mixin. So it's kind of like separation of concerns. Okay. So let's take a look at the template that I've created. And I'm going to create placeholders for the game and a placeholder for the message to the user. Okay. And in the component, let's go ahead and extend that Mixin. So what I can do is to import responsive Mixin. And you provide a path to the Mixin. So the Mixin lives in app Mixins. So that's lights out /Mixins /responsive. And included responsive Mixin as part of the component. And finally, let's show the lights out component in the app. So I'll go to app templates and applications, remove the default here, and change it to lights out. So that's it. Let's see what we have. I'm going to run Ember server and see what we get. So that's this part. Okay, so I'll go to localhost 4200. And you should see a blank screen, and that means it worked. Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's an awesome feeling. So it's like
Vision of a configuration like right there.
Yeah.
Screen.
So let's actually start creating the game now that we have this Ember D3 project set. So I've divided my steps into 6 parts. First, I'm going to initialize some of the variables. Then I'm going to insert that responsive Mixin. And then add some scale, container, the buttons, and then the logic to the game. So that's the roadmap for my game. So let's first test the Ember water by showing just a simple message to the user. So what I want to do is go back to the template and modify this as follows. If lights are out, then I'm going to show a congratulations message. Otherwise, let's show how many moves the player has made. Okay, very simple. And you see that it works. I didn't include a nice font, so this is the font that we'll stick with. Let's go back to the component now. So what I'm going to do is initialize some of the variables that we'll need. So let's stop there. So I've created this init, which is one of the Ember's lifecycle methods. So what this means is that when the component is initialized, we have 2 variables. Number of buttons says how many buttons there are on the x-axis and the y-axis. And the number of moves is how many moves the player has made so far. So that's 0. So with this simple change, I should see the 0 because that's the variable that we show in the template. Next, let's initialize the buttons. So looking at this diagram, we see that we have a grid of buttons, right? So it's kind of natural to consider a 2D array. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a 2D array of objects. And I know how many buttons there are along the x-axis. And actually, sorry. The way I'm going to do this, because I come from a mathematical background, this is going to be my I, and this is going to be my j. Okay. So this is going to be number of buttons along the y direction. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to push objects. And this object is going to contain two information, the coordinates and a Boolean variable that says whether the light is on or off. And by default, let's set it to off. And then I'm going to store this in buttons. Hopefully that worked. So the way we can check this is go back to the template and show these buttons the light statuses. So I can do a for loop. And the handlebars we do each. So each row of buttons. And let's call that, each buttons as row of buttons. And for each row of buttons as button. And let's display the light status. So I can do button is light on. So if it is on, let's just show a simple text of 1. And if it is off, let's show a text of 0. So that way we can check whether we initialize the buttons correctly or not. And let's add some divs. Close this, div, and close. Okay, so if this worked, I should see 25 zeros because initially I set the is light on to false, and indeed we see 25 zeros. And if I change the default value to true, I should see 25 ones, right? So there you go. Because we're going to use D3 to create the buttons and the lights, I'm going to get rid of the each statement. So that's gone. All right, so that's step 1. I initialized some variables. Step 2 is to create a Mixin that does the responsiveness. And again, I'm just going to copy paste the code. That starts. And you see why I wanted to skip this, right? Okay. And while we're at this, I'm going to include a font so that it looks nicer. Cool. Okay, so if you want to take a look at the responsive, there are a few points that I think is worth mentioning. First, I've created this variable called element identifier and set it to a value called #game. So what I'm doing is I'm telling Ember where to insert the D3 code. It's a div element with an ID called game, and that game appears here. So this is where the D3 code is going to be inserted. Second, if you look at the add resize listener and remove resize listener, what's happening is that I'm using jQuery to figure out how much width the div can take. And if the screen size changes, the div element is drawn again. And finally, the third thing that I want you to notice is that with just a bit of math and planning, we can make this D3 mobile responsive. Okay, so I'll let you take a look at that on your own time. But let's go ahead and move on. So the next step is we have this coordinate system from 0 to 5, but that's not the actual coordinate system that we're going to work with. Because eventually, we want to show these buttons on either the desktop or the mobile screen, right? So we have to somehow translate these coordinates to the coordinates on the screen. So the way we do that is using scale in D3. For this one, I need Ember's computer property, the computer method. Let's move this here, and I'll say, and I'm going to need this function called scale linear from D3 scale. And what I'm going to do is create two variables, if you will, scale x and scale y. They're going to be computer properties. And what they depend upon is the number of buttons across the x-axis and the width of the screen. And for the scale y, I need to know the buttons along the y-axis and the height. Okay. Let me first write the code and explain what's happening. Oops, sorry. Okay, so scale x and scale y are called computer properties in Ember. So computer properties means that these values change whenever the number of buttons across the x or y axis changes, or the screen size, the width or the height changes. It's an awesome way to always use the most current setup. I'm using D3 scale linear function here, and what that means is I stretch the coordinate space that I have linearly, and I can shift it by constant. So in linear algebra terms, we're doing an affine transformation. I think another easy way to know what's happening is that if you have a coordinate of 0, that'll get mapped to the 0 on the physical space, so that's the mobile. And likewise, along the y-axis, if you start with the y coordinate of 0, that'll get mapped to the coordinate of 0 on the screen. And if it is 5, which is the number of buttons, that'll get mapped to the right side of the screen. And then the 5th button is going to get mapped to the bottom of the screen. So does that make sense? And everything in between is proportional, it's linear.
Do you have to import scale linear?
You do, yeah.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, no problem.
Did I miss where height and width came from?
Oh, sorry, the width and the height, they came from the Mixin.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Okay. And that's the width and the height of the container that I'm going to talk about later. All right. Okay. So the next step is to create the container. I'm going to create a container in SVG. So SVG container, much like a div container, it allows you to reserve space on the DOM so that you can insert D3 elements inside. The way we create the container is as follows. So I'm going to create a method called create container.
Scale x. This one. Those are
Yeah, thanks. Yep. So first find that div element with the ID game. And what I'm going to do is call inner HTML is equal to empty string. So that just clears out everything if there is something inside. I'm going to get the container width and the height. And again, these values come from the Mixin. And I also have margin. Okay. So I have this method, but I have to call it somehow. And the way I'm going to call it is as follows. First, I'm going to create another method called draw game. As part of the drawing game, I have to call this create container. And I'm going to call the draw game as part of Ember's lifecycle. Okay, so the reason I use did insert element instead of init is I want to make sure that the div element, the game div element, exists first, so that I have a place to insert all the D3 elements. So let's actually create a container. So I need another D3 method called select that comes from D3 selection. And inside the select, you can just provide the CSS. So in this case, I have the this.get element identifier, which is the pound game. And once I selected this element, I can append an SVG tag, add some attributes as much as I like. So I'm going to add a class attribute called container. I can also specify the container's width, its height, and once I've created this, I'm going to save it so that I can refer to it in other places. So let me stop and explain what's going on. So again, I selected the element, the game element, and inside I'm going to append an SVG element. That SVG has a class called container, and so I'm just adding a class name so that I can refer to it some other time. I specify the width and the height, and how much the actual view box is. So it's just taking 0, 0, container width, container height, and it's just take up the whole space. And then lastly, I added this preserve aspect ratio of x, mid, y, min. And what that means is if the user ever happens to either stretch or shrink the browser, this rescaling is going to happen with respect to the top center. And I did that just because I think it kind of makes a little smoother. The transition, I think, is a little smoother when the user changes the browser size. Let me add one more thing. So after I create the container, I'm going to append a G element, and I'll explain what that means. It also has a class. That's it, actually. So inside the container, I've actually created a board. And by board, I'm referring to this actual thing. Okay? I've added a G element, and G stands for group. So this is one of the things that I'd like you to take out, to take with afterwards. So a group, much like a folder, allows you to group things that are related to each other. And I think this really helps, especially with debugging and testing. So if you happen to, so for my roadmap, I group all the vertices together. I group all the edges together, all the icons together. So that way, in my testing, I know exactly how many there are going to be, for example. Who here uses Ember test selectors, by any chance? Do you? So I think it's an awesome package. You can also do the data test tags by doing this. And do that. It's very simple. Okay, so that's the end of the step. Let's check whether this worked or not. So just by looking at this code, it's kind of hard to tell, did I do this correctly, right? So the way I can check is to look at the DOM. So here is the game div element, and inside I have that SVG element, right?
Bump that up a couple of months later.
Yeah, if I...
No, plus.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, so inside the div element, the game div element, I have the SVG. It has the data test container tag if you ever want to use it for testing. It has the class of container, some width and height, view box, and so on. And inside the SVG, remember, I added a group, right? So let's check if that's there, and then it is. So that's one way you can test whether you did this correctly or not. Okay, just 2 more steps. So this time I'm going to actually create the buttons. And lastly, I'll add the logic so that we can actually play this game. So after create container, I'm going to create another method called create buttons. And I'm going to call this after I've created the buttons. I know the button size from the Mixin. So let me stop. So what I want to do is I want to draw rectangles as buttons, right? And to draw a rectangle in D3, I need to know three information. Its location, its width, and its height. We know the width and the height from the Mixin, and that's given by the button size. The question is, where do we get the location from? Well, we know the coordinates in the parametric space, so-called 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. The question is, how do I know the coordinates in the physical space, the mobile or the desktop? And that's where the scale X and scale Y come in. So I'm going to So let me get these three things. I have a board from create container, and in that board, I'm going to append another group, and that group has a class called buttons. Okay, so once I created this class called buttons, I can always refer to it by doing select. So I do select.buttons. And inside, I'm going to look for all the rectangular elements. So far, there are none. So we have to provide it some information. The way we do that is button group and do enter. Okay. So once I'm inside, I can append the rectangular elements, provide some class. Here's the x coordinate, the y coordinates, width, height. Let me just type all the things that I need here. Okay, so the width and the height we know, right? It's the button size. But what about the x and y coordinates? Well, first let's get all the buttons back. So I have that this.get.buttons, right? So this is going to get the 2D array of buttons. But in D3, it's much easier to work with 1D array of information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce it to a 1D array using JavaScript reduce. So just to show what's happening here, let's do console log and see what buttons is. So it's just a 1D array of all the buttons, and I'm traversing in this way: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. Okay? So once you have this 1D array, I can provide it to D3 as follows. After select all, I'll do data, buttons. So you can pass in whatever information you want the D3 to have. So once I have the information, I can refer to it like this. Let's say I want to keep track of the IDs, for example. So I do it this way. The x coordinate. Well, we know the coordinates, the 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, but we have to make sure that to get the actual coordinates in the physical space. So we have that scale x. Think of these as functions. So I do scale x of button coordinates x. If I have scale x of 0, I'll get 0. Scale x of 1 is going to be like 200 or so. Scale x of 2 is going to be 400, and so on. And likewise for the y coordinate. And depending on whether the light is on, I can show some colors. Okay, let's see if this worked. There we go. So we have 25 rectangles as buttons. It's purple because it's off. And again, if you switch it to true, These are the lights on. So I think it's really nice how we just, I forgot to mention, you use dots to create a chain of D3 commands. And this is a pattern that you'll see over and over in D3. So I really like the fact that with just one chain of D3 commands, you can pretty much draw the entire game, right? You have the gray borders, the purple buttons, and the pink lights. Another thing that I like to mention is this enter.
Yeah,
So enter means that whenever something is created, then do this. There are two other things called merge and exit that I don't use here. So merge, think of that as what happens when you update an information, and exit is what happens when you delete information. So by providing these things, D3 automatically does things for you. So just say, and when you enter, do all this. When you want to merge, when you want to update information, do this. When you want to exit, then do this. And D3 is going to take care of all of it.
When would you do that? Like when you alter the data?
Yes. So for example, in the graph that I have for the roadmap, you can also delete edges. You can try to modify it. So that's how I use it. All right. So I'm running out of time. So what I'd like to do is now just copy paste everything. So what I want to do is create gradients. So this is something that I experimented with for this demo, and I like it. I feel like it makes the user experience much nicer. So when she create gradients, let's start it here. I have this ID, and instead of using these pound hexadecimal, I can do URL and the ID, which is radial gradient. Okay, subtle, but I think it looks nicer. So this is the off state. If you have on, then you get this. It's a nice application of gradients. And finally, let's insert, it's my last step. Let's add logic to the game so that we can actually play this. So there are three parts. First, I need to make sure that when the game starts, there's a puzzle and you can actually solve this puzzle. Two, when the light is pressed, the light and its adjacent ones should be toggled. And three, I need to be able to check if all the lights are out. So I'm just going to copy paste these codes. Let's put it here. Surprisingly, I don't have the last one. So let me quickly walk through. So the way I can ensure that a puzzle is solvable is to walk backwards. I start from the solution, take one step back by pressing a button random, take another step back, and so on until I get to the start state. And one benefit of this approach is that you know the steps to get to the finish line, right? So you might be able to use this. You might be able to use this sequence in your tests. So you have the toggle function. It's simple. So there's nothing special there. What I'd like to show is how to use Ember's on-click method. Use D3's on-click method with Ember's native actions. So if all the lights are out, I'm just going to return so that it does nothing. Otherwise, let's try to toggle the button, to toggle the lights. I update the number of moves that I made, and I redraw the game. So the way I can call this action in D3 is the on click, and then button this.send, button on click. And then I can pass extra parameters if you like. I think that's it. Let's see. Oops, something happened. Copy is not defined. Sorry, internal. Sorry. Nice. So now if I press this button, it toggles, and there we go.
Sweet.
So there you go. The on-click method comes with additional data, the event data, such as mouse location when the button has been pressed. And that might be a very useful information. The way you can access it is instead of the arrow function, just use a regular function call. And inside the function, you can say, I think it's mouse.this. So mouse is another function that's available from the D3 selection. And it's very useful information because not only does it give you the coordinates, but its coordinates relative to the container. So initially, I tried to calculate this coordinate myself, and it's really difficult because there might be other things going on, right? So just use the native D3's mouse. So that's it. Do you have any questions? Cool. Well, appreciate it, guys. Yeah.